response to Representative Burleson's assertion that labor is providing value to the members, they will pay to belong. Sometimes the membership does not know or desire what the industry needs. Sometimes an industry has a need. The industry, the customer, they have a need to be fulfilled. And sometimes the workers don't understand that need or don't necessarily agree with that. Point in case is safety. The construction industry was notoriously an unsafe industry to be in for the past umpteen years. Management demanded safety training. It wasn't until management and labor got together and forced the rank and file. Once again, the guys, the people in the field, they're rough, tough construction workers. I mean, we've all got this picture of a construction worker. They're rough, tough, they're bulletproof. I'm not going to get hurt. I'm going to do that. I want to reach that last little bit, hang over this little bit. I won't ever get hurt. It's not going to happen to me. It took joint effort between labor and management to bring the safety factor down. Now the safety in the St. Louis construction industry is one of the safest out there. Now, in reference to, someone made a point about the safety and the right to work states. One of the unintended consequences of right to work legislation in the construction industry, and I get this very firsthand from Mr. Stan Merritt with Merritt Brothers Company down in Texas. They're a wall and ceiling contractor down there that employed 3,000 people across the state of Texas. One of their biggest problems is the misclassification of workers. Now, the safety statistics can be extremely skewed when everybody is classified as an independent contractor. That's one of the unintended consequences of right to work in Texas, and I brought Mr. Merrick up here to speak before another panel last year, and he didn't want to get into the right to work fray, but he did want to address some of the unintended consequences of right to work and what happened to him in Texas. So, once again, I think this is not the right thing for the state of Missouri. It's not the right thing for the construction industry, and I'd like you to reconsider everything. And all due respect to you, Mr. Burleson, I think you're off, and I'd like the opportunity to be able to help educate you a little bit more. If anyone has any questions, I'd be pleased to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks.
Thank you.
Ron Staggs. If our witnesses would please fill out a form, we do have to have it.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I wanted to dispel some things that I know you're going to be hearing, and some I couldn't see because of Colin, but from this side of the group, there were questions that I would like to address from a different perspective. I'm a senior citizen, retired. I spent 15 years in a large communications union and 15 years in management. I've seen both sides, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Believe me, unions are not that benevolent, especially when it comes to young workers, women, and minorities. But I could spend the entire afternoon on that if I won't need to. If you look around, I don't think you'll find a lot of those that would be speaking on behalf of the union. I support the bill because everybody deserves economic freedom of choice. I believe a worker's labor is his and not the union's. It's not fair to have to pay an organization, a business, a fee to work as a kickback, nor is it fair to pay a union for the right to work. There was somewhat of a exchange about our representatives being a lot like a collective bargaining unit. And I think there is a lot of consistencies. Let us remember that the union is the exclusive bargaining agent, but that deprives the individual the right to bargain for themselves. And when that happens, they arbitrarily put a cap, a ceiling, on how much that individual can make, because he can no longer negotiate his unique talents. Put another way, you as our representatives are elected by simple majority, just like the unions are, to negotiate on behalf of your constituents on all laws and matter of state business. Much like the collective bargaining unit, they have the exclusive right. There is a distinct difference. You're elected every 2 years, but many union members have never had that right or that chance to vote where they wanted to keep that union. The next thing that's awful different is we pay our taxes to pay your salary. Union people pay their dues to support union leadership to testify. However, they do not pay their dues to support campaign contributions to representatives that may be contrary to not only union members, but also senior citizens and the poor. You may be able to argue one way or the other, but the cost of doing business is affected by union wages and benefits. People who live on fixed incomes have no way to recoup that. Unlike a coercive bargaining unit that can force key items such as automobiles, housing. If I need to replace my water heater, I have to pay a union plumber at union wage to meet code specified by our municipal organizations. I have no other means to do it. So you have to remember that when the union takes away the individual's right as a worker to negotiate his salary, he's also taking away and allowing a abusive union to drive up prices, which impact seniors and minorities and the poor. I suspect that each of you would say that you represent all of your constituents, and yet I didn't contribute a dime to any one of you. And I'm sure many of your constituents didn't contribute a dime. So is it any more fair to expect that when you elect by a simple majority a bargaining unit, that they also have to represent those that don't see eye to eye with how they spend their money? There's never been a rank and file vote on whether you, as a representative that receives union-backed money, it doesn't come from a vote. It comes from a PAC funded by union dues. Is that fair? I think not. Because oftentimes, there's a large section of that union group that absolutely and vehemently opposed to many of the votes and ideology some of those who are receiving these things. So who are you representing? Are you representing all of your constituents or special interests? I can give you many stories also, personal, of the good, bad, and the ugly. I want to talk about fairness. I want to say this. I have personally experienced being laid off from a union job, not for performance or conduct, but by being employed less time than my coworkers, despite performing the same complex modification of switching equipment twice as fast as the most senior worker. How fair is that? I don't think that's length of employment is a bona fide occupational qualification. That's discrimination, folks. I was confronted by senior union workers and shop stewards in attempts to intimidate me to slow down so as not to make my union brothers look bad. I don't know about you, but it's awfully hard to stretch half a day's work to cover a full day. Is that fair? Is it fair for a new employee having mastered the craft in 2 years be deprived of 3 years' worth of top pay for the craft because the union negotiated wage progression schedules over 5 years? Is it fair that union bullies threaten physical violence, property vandalism in the work environment during strikes and officer elections and contract votes? Is it fair to be forced to pay union dues that uses my money or a member's money to support candidates and social issues that we abhor, instead of using the money to provide strike funds? And that's an issue that's near and dear to my heart, is many unions do not offer a strike fund unless you have gone through all of your friends, relatives, neighbors, and banks, owned institutions, and provide affidavits that they rejected you. So, needless to say, not too many people get that. But instead, the money goes to fund a lot of volunteers' re-election, instead of when those people who are out walking the picket line lose those weeks, 2 weeks, months of pay. There's never a rainy day fund for that. There may be some unions that do, but by and large, this large communication union does not. Is that fair? I've seen before the union received closed shop status, non-union employees have their cars, during a strike situation, their cars keyed as they went through the picket line, egged, flat tires given to them in the parking lots. Is that fair? It's not all rosy out there, folks. If you've never been there, it's not a pretty picture if you disagree with that much. One of the people over here said something about they have to pay their dues to their bar association. The only trouble is with that is the bar does not regulate how much money you can earn, charge for practicing his profession. The union caps it. So, in closing, I would like to say, is it fair for unions to drive the cost of doing business up until our businesses are no longer competitive globally? And by any common sense effort, where are you going to send the jobs? Overseas. There's a real reason unions are in decline. They no longer serve their members. And that's a fact. Thank you.
Cindy Frazier.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you for coming and testifying today. We've heard a little different perspective, I think, with you than we have earlier, and it's good to hear all sides on a very important issue to this state. You mentioned something that just caught my ear there. I guess being from Southwest Missouri, a small town, I guess I wasn't aware, but you mentioned that you wanted to have your water heater changed. In I guess it's the community you live in or some community. You have to pay a union plumber to do that?
To pass code, once that thing is it is a union plumber. In the city of Manchester is the last place I have to do it.
It's very interesting. I wasn't aware of that. That's what I thought you said. I appreciate you expounding on that. You know, we've heard an awful lot today on this issue, and I think some of the points that you brought up have been, like I said, a little different. It does seem like, I know a couple of contractors, or one of them mentioned they chose to use union workers. It was their choice to do that as a business person. I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. But this issue is also a choice. Do you agree with me?
Most definitely. A fundamental choice. It is a fundamental right. And just like electing you, we have a representative form of government. That's essentially what a bargaining unit is. It's a representative form. But it also restricts us in ways that we give up some of the rights. And when you give up a right, then that bargaining agent or that group has the responsibility to do it without cost to me. Don't charge me to represent me. Go to union.
Well, and again, we've heard a lot of things about how good the unions are, and I know they are. I'm certainly very appreciative of how they have represented folks in metropolitan areas, specifically St. Louis County. Dooley was here. But, you know, in my community, we've got buildings that are empty. We just want jobs. And it would be great if they all paid, you know, $25 to $50 an hour, but we'll take jobs. So if this particular bill would help do that, I can't see where it could be of any harm. There's certainly no union jobs there it's going to replace.
Let's look at unions have almost outlived their economic life. Let's look at Google. Let's look at the software development industry. They have no unions, and yet they're paying significantly more than even the pipe fitter, significantly more than most any other craft you can find. They offer free daycare. They offer free health club memberships. Their benefit package is tremendous, and yet they're not represented by unions. And their skill is not that difficult to learn. And I can tell you what I'm talking about. And let me relate one instance. As a manager, I had two women clerks, that the union didn't like because I trained them. I sent them to programming. The company offered programming schools to learn how to do a simple step that would save them probably close to, we evaluated about 30 hours a week in time, just by being able to do a little simple step. And yet the union complained about that. And I couldn't increase their wage beyond that salary level. How fair is that?
Thank you, Mr. Staggs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything?
Point inquiry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, you made some statements, and I want some clarification on those statements. You're talking about minorities, and you say they not speak for unions. I beg to differ, because in 2006, when this was on the ballot, minorities voted larger than any sector in it against right to work. So minorities had a large voice against right to work in the state of Missouri. especially in a state where minorities double the unemployment rate. So businesses in private sectors, regardless of labor or whatever, those might be the only jobs that are available. The skilled trades jobs are much more available to minorities than private sector jobs, because those companies are still not hiring, yet we want to get rid of right to work, and yet we want to get rid of affirmative action when these companies are still not hiring minorities and women. And today, in 2013, women still make less than their male counterparts doing the same position. So I would beg to differ on your statistics. But I also want to ask you a question on, is it fair for businesses to drive down wages and reduce the buying power of consumers when they're trying to take care of their families? You're talking about unions driving up the cost of wages. Is it fair for businesses to drive down the cost of wages? It happens every day.
Economics is a very complex business. And would you pay more money for something that's not worth it?
I'll pay more money if it's worth it to me.
If it's worth it to you. So isn't that an individual choice?
Well, you have to look at the history of labor, though. Unions did start because businesses were fair. Unions started because individuals were unable to negotiate wages. And right now today, even in workplaces, these companies are not paying higher salaries. That's why you have the fight and the strike and people going out on the picket line, because they want to pay wages lower than the cost of living.
We can debate that issue. It's not necessarily for the reasons that you're talking about. When wages will go down or are arbitrarily held down when there's not work. What causes us not to have work? Where our common sense business decisions dictate that if it's cheaper to send this job someplace else, they're going to do it. It only makes sense. It's common sense.
Well, we can't. We can't compete with China and places where their living standards are lower. America set the bar, and America needs to keep the bar up high and not allow other countries to influence them to lower the bar.
Then do not restrict freedom of choice so that people could be mobile and be able to negotiate for themselves rather than be restricted to a certain level that the union says is fine.
Well, we can disagree on that, because I've been on labor union for over 20 years. I've been a steward, and I've sat on several committees, been at the bargaining table several times. So we can beg to differ on that point.
Bargaining is a lot like making sausage. And what happens when a company says, here's the dollars, divide it up however you want. Who's going to get the most money out of that package? The largest constituency. It's not ever divided fairly. The largest voting constituency is going to get the thing. If it happens to be, in the case of this communication company, it was the larger percentage of employees were craft, the highest paid employees. The clerks always got the shaft.
It depends on what position you're in your bargaining. So I'm sorry, what union are you with?
I was in Communication Workers of America.
I'm in Communication Workers of America.
I noticed that you have received large amounts of campaign.
That's right.
$7,000, was it?
No, you're incorrect.
Oh, more than that?
Yes. And I'm not afraid to say it.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I think we'll stop this at this point. Michael Lewis, would you like to testify, please, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my honor to be here today. My name is Mike Lewis. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Missouri AFL-CIO and registered lobbyist. I'd like to talk against this bill for several reasons. A lot have been touched on, but I want to make this point. You can Google about anything you want, and you can read about anything you want. If it's the Mackinac, you're going to get a different slant on things. But the best thing to do is go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and do your own comparisons, which I've done. I can honestly state from those facts that the average workers, union and non-union in the state, it doesn't make any difference. This is about the middle class, make $1,500 per year less in a right-to-work state. The rate of employers who sponsor health care is 3% lower in those right-to-work states. Now, there's been talk about we need to lower the wages to bring jobs. If we want to get involved to the race to the bottom, pretty soon we're going to be negotiating wages so that to keep jobs from going to Mexico. We know we can't do that. That's not going to happen. Why do we want to get involved in the race to the bottom? Let's talk about safety, the impact of safety on job sites. Well, one other thing. The states, they always say we're circled by right-to-work states. You can go start in Iowa, go to Kansas, Kentucky, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and finally Arkansas. Every one of those states that surrounds Missouri, the average wage rate, union or non-union, in those states is lower than it is in the state of Missouri. The impact of safety on the job site. Somebody said that there are like 42.4% less injuries were cited in Oklahoma. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the workplace deaths is 53% higher in right-to-work states than it is non-right. Workers already have the right to be in a right-to-work environment if they want to. They're protected by the Supreme Court ruling of the Beck decision that covers all workers in the federal decision. This allows for employees to pay for only that part of dues that is specifically used to represent them for negotiations and grievance representation. And there's been testimony opposite of that, but I can tell you, having been a business representative for the Machinists Union for 26 years, if you choose not to go forward with the grievance of an employee who is a Beck objector, you're going to get hit with a lawsuit that they're going to win for failure to represent. It's that easy. There is no such thing as not being able to represent people who don't want to pay dues. Everybody talks about the fact that the unions have lost 450,000 jobs. There's been testimony today from the other side that right-to-work states have lost 450,000 jobs, while the non-right-to-work states have picked up 39,000. Where's the other 410,000 jobs? They're in Mexico. They're overseas. They're offshore. The CWA. When was the last time you were able to call MasterCard and talk to someone in English when you had a problem with your bill? This is about the race to the bottom. This is about doing away with workers' rights, and this is about lowering wages. Make no mistake. Many employers, and unfortunately only 2 were able to make it today with the short notice of the hearing announcement, but many employers want to negotiate with unions and include a union security clause. Many of them, not just the building and construction trades employers, but manufacturers do as well. And that's the decision that the employer, the majority of the employees, and the representatives of the bargaining committee agree to. That is their right to do that if they want to do it. They won't even be able to, you're taking away the employer's right to do that now by protecting the employees. I haven't seen a lot of bills that so far this year have been introduced to create jobs. Workplace freedom bills do not create jobs. The workers have the right to decertify a union security clause anytime during the course of that collective bargaining agreement if they want to. If they're not happy with their representation, they can decertify the union security clause and they can have a right to work company. It's not it's something that is governed by the National Labor Relations Board. They'll certify the petition to do away with it. They'll run the secret election to determine, and if a Democratic majority of that company no longer want to be covered under a union security clause, that union security clause is gone. They can also decertify the entire union and just have no representation at all. This is about outside influence and outside money. Over the last 3 sessions, there have been less than a handful of employers from this state that give testimony as to why it would be helpful to them to pass this law. The funding for those proposals come from ALEC, and I know nobody admits they know him today, but they do. And other organizations that only want to undo the representation of all workers, not just union workers, both in the workplace and the lawmaking process. There have been companies that recently have come to Missouri. Express Scripts, a huge employer in St. Louis County. MasterCard, huge employer in St. Charles County. They're currently building certain tea products in Lawrence or somewhere along Highway 70. I see it all the time. It's in a rural area. It's not in a union area. It's not in a non-union area. It's in a rural area where they need jobs. And they're going to build that plant here. They didn't care where right to work was in Missouri. They're building that plant. We've all heard of Certainty. We've talked about them. They were one of the most egregious employers having to do with mesothelioma. And yet, here they are, coming to Missouri to create more jobs. Finally, I'd like to talk about Boeing. I was very involved in that. And the sponsor of the bill suggests that Boeing, by way of the union contract being held up and re-voted on, that was the problem as to why Boeing was having a problem making up their mind. It was the union's fault. Well, is that a suggestion that Boeing should be able to do whatever they want to do? It sounded to me, that's what I was hearing. That Boeing, if they don't want to any longer pay into a pension plan and create a 401 plan for their workers, if this was a right to work state, by God, they'd be able to do it. Not true. It's still a vote, it's still a contract vote, and it's still voted on by a democracy method of which the majority of the people employed at that plant would do it. So, exactly 110 years ago, Henry Ford doubled the wages of Ford workers for one reason, so that they could afford to buy the product they make. And if we can't continue to subscribe to that in this state, there's more problems with creating jobs than just right to work. I have no further testimony, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Frank. Go ahead.
I'm scared.
So, my first question, do you know any municipality, you're from St. Louis County, correct?
Born and raised.
Born and raised in St. Louis County, in the state of Missouri. And I gotta think you probably have a pretty good handle on the several municipalities located within St. Louis County. Do you know any one of those that actually require a union installer for a hot water heater?
I know they require license.
As do I.
Plumbers,
sure.
But I don't think that you have to be union.
I've never.
I think that's a quality control issue, not a union membership.
I go back to make sure that Manchester City is not doing something I don't know about, but it kind of threw me in. I just want to check with you because you're the guy on that issue. I kind of like the joke you made about the ALEC thing. There's been a few jokes going around today on the ALEC question, and nobody wanted to admit that they are members or even go to the meetings or anything. The sponsor body is aware that during the break there was a lot of emails floating around showing the agenda the actually was a featured speaker at, and so I like the question, the little joke that you made there. But it does seem like this is a lot of language that ALEC puts out nationwide as a model. Am I correct with that? This was aimed directly at Missouri. Well, it is, not today, but this model legislation was created far before we came here in this session, correct?
Right. I can look up model ALEC legislation online without having paid dues.
I also want to talk about a former witness here, but I didn't get a chance to question him, so I have this one with you because you are an expert on organized labor, where it was talked about that the right to actually we would exceed the union wage, that we're forbidden to do so. I know there's terms out there like 5% over scale, 10% over scale. What would those kind of things possibly mean if we're we're frozen at union wages? It was always my impression, working the building trades, that the union wage was actually the minimum wage set, and that anyone who wishes, who is able to negotiate with our employer on an individual basis above and beyond collective bargaining could do so and be paid those 5% over wages, 10% wages. Am I right, or are we actually locked into that set wage where that's where we're going to be waived?
Representative, I too was confused by that statement, and because I know that there is 5%, 10% over contract rate, and a contract rate simply outlines the minimum that employers are required to pay.
Minimum standard. So if they wanted to have more safety regulations, they could. If they wanted to have more higher wages, they could have better insurance. Those are all things allowed under a union contract. The union contract is just setting the minimum, correct?
Correct.
And another thing that kind of threw me off in previous questions was the fact that how unions could fire, unions protected and prevented unproductive workers from ever being fired. And it seems to me, back in my days with the pipe fitters or the laborers or even service employees, that there was a term out there that they're being fired for non-productivity. What does something like non-productivity mean as an excuse for terminate if in fact the union protects the termination and they never get fired anyway?
That's correct. Almost every employer, whether it's a contractor or a manufacturer, hires people to do time studies on jobs.
Right.
And when you don't meet the time study amounts of times as well as the amount of good work versus comeback work,
productivity hours comes down to a certain level there, and if your work isn't matching that,
then you're thrown into the process of being reprimanded.
which could include termination.
Up to and including termination.
No, we had some misinformation going there. And the last thing I found striking with some previous witnesses were the fact that they said blatantly that obviously, I think it's our business here, if it's cheaper to send the jobs overseas, then that's where we're going to go. And so that the effect on business is going to be, let's look for the bottom line, and we need to match that here, which sounds an awful lot to me, chasing that lowest common denominator. And if that's what we're trying to do, don't we again just lose out completely on China, Mexico, Malaysia, Indonesia? Authorization is going to be this every single time, and trying to go that kind of route is a doomed failure for our country instead of trying to promote some decent standard of living for our middle class.
I agree with that question.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Representative Frager.
Inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, representatives.
Good afternoon, Mr. List. Thank you for testifying. Can't let Representative Frank have all the airtime here. First of all, I wanted to make a comment about, you talked about Henry Ford. The unions really didn't start until later on, right, when his son took over?
That's correct. That was not a union issue.
So he kind of created this middle class on his own without union help, you might say. I mean, he was an entrepreneur, and he knew what it took, and he figured it out on his own without that help. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
I just want to clarify that, make sure my history was right. I guess I'm going to ask you this question just because you represent the AFL-CIO in Missouri, and you're, I guess, the most prominent union, I guess you might say. Recently, I was reading in your Labor Tribune, which I read from cover to cover every time I get one. I find it very interesting. But, we had a kind of a war against fast food restaurants here recently, picketing, I guess they were, because of minimum wage, I'm assuming is what it was about, or the way it read. I guess my question would be, do you support that position? Do you support doing those kinds of things to these small business people?
Well, I don't think it was a war. I think it was an awareness project of the fact of what people are making as full-time workers and trying to raise a family on.
So the AFL-CIO, they support that type of endeavor, would you say?
We did support that particular endeavor, yes.
And how about boycotting businesses in Missouri that aren't union or that don't participate with or hire union companies to do their work or whatever, like it's posted on the back of the Labor Tribune periodically? Do you support boycotting or publishing that? And again, a lot of these are mom and pop businesses just trying to make a living. Do you support that also, or does your organization, I should say, not you personally?
Most of the mom and pops that show up on that do not patronize list are in direct competition with mom and pops who pay a living wage and benefits to their employees. And if they can do it, why shouldn't we support the ones who are paying the people to get them off the rolls of food stamps and other social programs? And it just makes sense that that's who we should support. So my answer is yes.
Okay. Well, you know, and some of the companies that are boycotted on there do provide benefits and health insurance and what have you. Would you agree? I mean, not all of them. Obviously, there will be Target on there, Walmart, or whatever. I mean, there are larger companies that provide benefits. Would you agree?
I wouldn't agree that Walmart provides anything.
Really?
Yes.
I made a pretty good living with them for 17 years, but anyway.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
yeah, sure. Well, I guess the thing is whether, you know, if minimum wage needs to be debated here in the State House, or if we need to look at minimum wage, I think that's one thing to do. As your folks bring a bill to the table, let's talk about it. But to boycott businesses, people that are out there trying to make a living, I don't understand the mentality of that. When, especially coming from union members who are making great wages, great livings, and these people, a lot of them, they just want jobs. And many of us started maybe in a minimum wage job. And so I guess that it's just hard for me to understand that. And I wanted to take this moment, since you were here in this environment, and we've talked a lot about unions and how great they are. And I agree, I think they do a great job in many cases. And this is not, I mean, I hate that we've came to this, to where right to work is about whether you are trying to bash the union or kill the union or not. I hate that, because I don't think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring new jobs to Missouri for people that don't have those great union jobs that all of us would love to have. So I just want to make that point, I guess, and see what your thoughts were on that.
Okay, can I go back to the patronized list?
Sure.
Is this okay?
Sure.
First of all, we don't go out and specifically hunt down union members who go to businesses that are on that patronized list. It's a list of encouragement for the people who have the funds, because they have a good union job, to go somewhere and pay a little more to have something done by another union brother or sister who is also making a good wage. We want to bring everybody up to the wage standards and the benefit standards that unions are accustomed to. That's our goal with the patronage.
Somebody would pay for that. You know, the consumer that will pay in the end. You agree with that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you.
Representative May, as long as it's a question about the testimony.
Have I asked questions not about the testimony? I have. Not that I'm aware of. I have one question I would like you to address. You heard previous testimony about the cap. I want you to talk about union capping wages, and how do you see that?
As I stated earlier, in a collective bargaining agreement, there are wage rates that have to be paid. They're a minimum. They're not a maximum. There are also, usually in most contracts, clauses that provide for education. Employee can go to the employer and say, I want to increase my knowledge on XYZ, will you help pay? And if the contract says 50%, they're guaranteed that 50%, usually if it's approved, but the employer can agree to pay more. A union contract, a collective bargaining agreement, is a set of standards that minimizes the amount that the employee collects.
And also, one other question. So you agree that, even in some private sector, outside of building trades, even in the private sector unions, that every company has different job classifications. And so in those different job classifications, people apply at their skill level in those classifications.
Not only do they apply, but they are promoted with skill levels within those classifications. And when it comes time for a layoff, the considered. However, just because there's an older worker who doesn't necessarily work as fast as a younger worker might, that seniority clause protects that older worker because that's what we do.
Exactly. And also, I wanted to point it out because, you know, I've been working for 20 years in, you know, Communication Workers of America, and I know there's different classifications because I know that I started off making less, and I moved to different higher classifications within the company as my skill level. As the company offered training in those areas, which, you know, through the partnership of the union and the company, the union offered those training skills that allowed you to move up. You know, like technical training skills allowed you to move to a technical position. So, you know, I just wanted to point that out because, you know, previous testimony was giving inaccurate information and misleading information to people. So I just wanted to say, you know, comment on that. Thank you.
I agree with your question totally. Thank you very much.
That's my case. Thank you, sir. Mr. Todd.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Philip Todd. I'm a resident of the 49th District across the river. I'm here to testify on behalf of this bill. I want to bring a little more personal angle to what's been talked about today. I grew up in a union household. My father was a teamster for nearly 30 years, but it wasn't by his choice. My father was a retail distributor of dairy products, otherwise known as a milkman. He had a route, which was his own. He owned his own truck. He owned his warehouse. The union was trying to get him to sign. He didn't want to sign. One day, whenever the semi-truck pulled up to deliver his order, there was a picket there in the drive of his warehouse. And the semi stops. And he told my dad, he says, Jerry, I can't pull in there. I can't cross that picket line because I'm a teamster. I'll lose my job. I'll have all kinds of horrible things happen to me if I cross that picket line. At that point, my father was compelled to join that union, or it was going to be economic ruin for him and his family, myself, my sister, my mother. We were going to lose everything because they placed a barrier against his will to his right to the enjoyment of the gains of his industry, which is also hallmarked in the Missouri Constitution. It's one of the things, Article 1, Section 2, one of the things that this body is supposed to protect is the gains for a particular industry. Now I want to move on a few years. I grew up, became an adult, had my own family. I joined the Brotherhood of Maintenance Away Union, railroad. They provided a good opportunity for me. It was good money. I was living in rural Missouri. There weren't any jobs around to speak of, low paying. It gave me an opportunity. I was able to work 6, 7, 8 months out of the year, depending on what the project was. Of course, I had to travel. They paid us for travel expenses, hotel, things like that, insurance. I made a pretty good living. I was a member of the union, but I never saw one single union representative in all the time, in 5 years that I was in that railroad union. We paid our dues. But really we just kind of laughed about it. It was a joke. Yeah, we got a union, ha ha ha. You know, where are they? What are they doing for us? Anyhow, I moved on from that job. I worked for myself for a few years. I worked for other companies. And I developed my skills as a mason. In 1999, I joined the Bricklayers Union here in Central Missouri. And work was good. Had a lot of work opportunities, a lot of hours. Of course, it's strictly seasonal work. There was a lot of times in the winter we didn't have work. Couldn't work because of the weather being not conducive to good working conditions. So, I was fairly happy with working 8, 9 months out of the year at that time. I made a pretty decent amount of money, and I had benefits, and they would carry over through the time that I was off work until the next season would roll around or the next project would roll around. In the year 2000 presidential election, I was in our union office one day, and they were handing out T-shirts. And I said, what do we got here? And they said, here, take one of these. Well, it was Gebhardt for President, BAC for Gebhardt for President, 2000. And I looked at it, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. And I kind of laughed. I said, don't you think that we ought to see if the man can win a primary before we start spending money like that? And they just kind of chuckled and said, well, we had some extra money around here, so we just thought we'd go ahead and spend it. That was kind of the first inkling that maybe, maybe there's some money being spent there and we weren't really being represented. As one of the other people was talking about, is that there's a lot of people there that may not be getting the representation because they might be slightly in a minority, but that doesn't mean that their voice and their opinion is not just as important as the others. Well, we carried on, and I kept on working. I actually was pretty comfortable. I joined the negotiating committee one year. I served on the negotiating committee for a contract. And that was a really interesting, eye-opening experience. I was not all sold about it, but at that particular time I was off work. My union offered to pay me my hourly salary for the time that we were in negotiations. So it was an opportunity to basically make a week's worth of wages while we negotiated around the table with the contractors. And one of the things that came to me at that point was that what the union gives, they can take away. If you're a contractor that all of a sudden decides that you don't want to participate in that collective bargaining agreement, or you don't want to sign up with a new collective bargaining agreement, they have the power to basically destroy your business. They'll take away all your help. They'll file lawsuits against you. They'll file grievances with National Labor Relations. They'll do everything they can to destroy, to bankrupt that company. So it kind of leaves the employer with really no choice. Well, I've got these bids out here that I'm sitting on, and I've got to have help. I've got a good workforce out here, good qualified people I can depend on to show up for work every day. So I'll go ahead and sign the contract, but I'm going to do it rather reluctantly. And that was the way that we carried on with business. I move on to the year of 2007, and we're in another presidential campaign. And again, I'm in the union business office. And there's campaign signs in there for people that I do not disagree or do not agree with. They undermine my core values and my beliefs to the point where I found it repulsive that a portion of my union dues was being spent to support these people. And have we ever been asked about that? No. We never had a vote of the rank and file there that we wanted to vote, that we wanted to support Obama for president, or Hillary for president, or Claire McCaskill, or the list goes on and on. There may have been a vote somewhere, but it wasn't very well advertised, if at all. And then the thing about the secret votes is, because they're secret, you never really know if the outcome is correct or not. You never had any way of really finding out whether our votes were really counting or being thrown away or being neglected. And I started complaining about it. I said, I don't want to pay my dues to support these causes, these people. Well, you can opt out it, but I guarantee when I started complaining, that's when the intimidation factor started kicking in. Because I was crossing the line. I wasn't the brother on the wall and the brother in the hall anymore. I was undermining their objectives. And it really upset them. It upset them to the point where I started losing out on work assignments. Now, they couldn't say that because I was against them that they could blacklist me from employment opportunities. But they could sure forget to call me whenever a job had come up. And I know for a fact that there were several times where I was in the hall looking for work, you know, saying, hey, I'm available. And I come to find out that the next day that somebody else had gone to work, that they had gotten the call, and I hadn't. And it really wasn't anything about seniority. It was about opportunity, or a lack of opportunity. But they sure did like to see me send those dues in every month. As long as I was obligated, as long as I paid my dues, I was obligated. I could not go to work for anybody else at the risk of losing my pension. And that's the economic reality of all of this that we've been talking about. I go back to what I said, is that the union can give, but they can also take away. Now, unions have done a lot of good things. They have improved workers' safety and the drug testing. I've got a lot of good friends who are still members of the labor union. I've got a lot of good friends who have the same sympathies as I do about these political leanings and the money that's being used to support people. But because of various circumstances that these other people have, they choose to remain silent, which silent is implied consent to a certain extent. But it just tears them up to know that their money is going for causes that they do not like, do not agree with. It's kind of like handing over money to buy bullets so that they can turn around and shoot us with it. Because that's exactly what it is. It's basically suicide. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Hear from Scott Ramshaw, please.
Chairman, committee members, my name is Scott Ramshaw. I'm with the Plumbers and Pipefitters out of St. Louis. Just to clarify what the one individual talked about, I can assure you in the city of Manchester, wherever that's at, you do not have to be a union plumber to just install a water heater. So we compete against open shops all the time, whether it's on construction projects or residential work. Somebody alluded to the fact that you might have to be a licensed plumber or licensed pipe fitter. That's the case, and that's to protect the integrity of the work that goes in and yourself. If a water heater is not properly installed, it could blow up, and it's a huge explosion. So if there's any questions to that, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Just to give you a rundown on myself, I'm starting my 36 years of pipe fitter. I started when I was 19. Had some great opportunities. Our average apprentice today is anywhere from 25 years old to 30-year-old. And those are individuals that have looked at different opportunities and they didn't work out, but they come back and try to get in the trade as a plumber or pipe fitter. And we put them through an apprenticeship program, 5-year apprenticeship program, and they graduate and move on. So, and as projects come up, we go ahead and put them to work. We're opposed to this House Bill 1099. Our local starts its 102nd year as an organization. The collective bargaining agreement that we have with our Mechanical Contractors Association and Plumbing Industry Council, it brings value. And it not only brings value to the end users, it brings values to the contractor, and it brings value to the plumbers and pipe fitters that we represent. We do have an international that works across the country too. It's the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. There's 8 other locals in the state of Missouri. There's one in St. Joe. There's 2 locals in Kansas City, a pipefitter local, plumbing. There's a combination local in Springfield. 562 in this state covers 67 counties from Arkansas up to Iowa on the eastern side of the state. And then we have the sprinkler fitters local in Kansas City and sprinkler fitter local in St. Louis. And we have the road local that picks up the different counties across the state that have to be taken care of. When we talk about the end users, we meet with the end users and other big companies across the state regularly to get their thoughts and ideas on how to make this construction process an easier process, not only for them, but for us, so that we can talk about issues that come up, whether they're good, bad, and different. It's important that we all sit down and have a discussion. I would hope somewhere in the House and the Senate that we could probably have some true debate on economic development in this state instead of going over issues like right to work and cutting wages. You know, I look back, I started in 2005 up here as a lobbyist. It's been a great experience. Had an opportunity to meet a lot of you. Some of you I haven't met yet. There's so many issues that we work on every day, you just can't get around. But you have to take care of the issues just as your priorities come up, our priorities come up. But the most important thing is that we're all sitting down trying to figure out how we can help one another. And sometimes this issue is in one of those issues that's just dividing the state. And economic development in this state has to move forward. And I think with the success of the Boeing legislation that came out, at least it got us all talking, sitting down, trying to move forward. But as we go across this country, we meet with owners groups like the Construction Users Roundtable, they call it CURT for short, or we meet with the Waterways Council to help rebuild the locks and dams, or we meet with the just the different smaller contractors and smaller owners of certain companies to supply them manpower for their retiring workers that work inside these facilities, because there's going to be a shortage, and everybody's looking at the retirement of their workforce, and it has to be, you have to have an educated workforce on maintenance for these facilities. So I think there's a lot we can do together. I think I know this is only going to divide us even more, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that we all sit down, take a step back, talk to your constituents back home. I'm sure right to work didn't possibly come up as you're running your campaigns or trying to move forward in this state. I just think there's a lot more important things we could be working on. As far as right to work, we believe that's not going to help our members. Wages, health benefits, and retirement package and safety is the most important thing. So as we move forward throughout the year, we'll look forward to having more discussions. I would hope that this committee would not take it upon the request of the Speaker to pass this bill out. I think there's a lot more at stake than just what the Speaker has to think. I'm sure you feel the same way as far as us as we represent our union members. We have to take a step back, figure out how to work together and move this state forward. That's the most important thing. So, with that, if there's any questions, I'll take them.
Senator Frank. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. I'd like to talk about just briefly of some of the dangers that you may face on your job. Not so much you, but the members that you represent may face upon their job, dealing with pressurized vessels or high power steam, those kinds of things. What kind of dangers do they face? Probably every day.
Yeah, I mean, we face dangers every day, but individuals face dangers every day just driving on the highways in the state. So
your members have already driven on that same highway. Now they're at the
work site, right? But I mean, it's you know, there's a risk on these construction sites. It's high. There's no doubt.
And here's what I'm getting at, though, Mr. Ramshaw, is you have a 5-year-long apprenticeship program today?
Yes.
Am I correct? My daughter's in a 5-year master's program over at St. Louis University, and she goes off summertime, so I think of 5 years. And I can imagine you address a lot of these issues in the classroom to give these young men and women some heads up before they go out into the job site as a journeyman, that they have even some experience to counter this type of on-the-job condition, correct?
You're correct. But we do have apprentices. They come in a couple times a year. They go through training at our training facility. But one of the most important places that they learn is that we pair them up with journeymen that have been in the business for years, and they start to learn the business or the tricks of the trade, which helps them smarter. Because in anything we do, or any different trade, or any type of business, there's always some ways that you can be more productive in what you do and be safe at it. And in a lot of cases, you don't get a second chance with some of the pressures that we deal with. I mean, our members build residential houses, and they go work in a nuclear powerhouse, and so that's everything in between. We're not just training somebody to go replace a water heater. If that guy's doing a water heater 1 week, he might be well into nuclear powerhouse in a month when it comes down. And Cameron's getting ready to come down for an outage at the nuclear powerhouse here sometime this year, I believe. It's every other year. So the workforce has to be trained, and we need to keep them in this area and move them around to the different industries that the demands come for the industry for the construction that's coming forward.
When I ask you specifically, first about the dangers you may face on the job, your members face on the job, you're pretty modest when you answer that, which is kind of indicative of the classic construction worker anyway. Hey, we all got dangers. Hey, it's dangerous driving on the road. But the dangers you do face are real. I know I could probably lose an arm or lose a leg just by walking across what looked to be a completely clear area, but didn't hear because it didn't exist, it didn't see because it was invisible, a high pressure steam line, and all of a sudden I've lost a body limb through no fault of my own, just walking down a solid where there may be high pressure steam lines exist, or maybe explosion of a high pressure vessel, or a acetylene tank falling over. And then you mentioned your 5-year apprentice program, and then you couple it with a journeyman. Is that a similar experience that you would see from the non-union sector as well too? That they put in the 5-year apprenticeship program, they'll couple them with a journeyman, walk them through almost as a parenting kind of thing for the first couple of years. Is similar experiences on both sides of the street, Mr. Ramshaw?
I'm pretty biased. I believe the United Association, along with the plumbers and pipefitters in St. Louis and across the state, probably give you the best training that you could possibly have in the piping and plumbing industry. I can't speak for the ABC. They have a school in Kansas City. I think they have a school down somewhere off of 61.
All those schools are federally sanctioned, yours and theirs. They're both federally certified.
It is, but you're allowed to go ahead and write your program and have it accepted by the Bureau of Labor, Department of Labor, to have your apprenticeship, and that's the guidelines you go by. We feel our guidelines are better. You're going to get a better all-around mechanic in that whole process. I haven't reviewed the ABC's open shop contracting apprenticeship program. Just haven't had time, but I can assure you that our program is second to none with the amount of money that we spend in the state for training and across this country.
Every one of your contractors participate in this type of program, and again, every one of your members. Is that same true on the other side, so that all non-union members are participating in their program for safety? Because I learned one thing, you get one unsafe guy out there, and
I can't speak for the open shop, but you know, the industry is changing rapidly. We have continuing education classes for the journeymen every evening, Monday through Thursday, at no cost to them. And we continually train the apprentices and bring them in for special requirements that are needed for different projects. As far as the safety goes on a project, there's a process for each procedure that you might do on specific work, and it's important that you follow those procedures, because if you don't, it could be the last procedure you work on.
Good time, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Greer.
Hey. My name is Stan Greer, and I am the Senior Research Associate with the National Institute for Labor Relations Research based in Springfield, Virginia. I'm speaking on behalf of the Institute today. That is a nonprofit charitable organization that does not lobby. So I will not be speaking, endorsing the legislation. However, I'll say up front that my information is going to be favorable, and I also will say that in addition to working for the Institute, I'll mention that the Institute is affiliated with the National Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and I also have a job with the National Right to Work Committee as the newsletter editor. So I'm certainly, personally supportive of right to work laws, but I am not testifying, endorsing the right to work law. However, I'd like to address a lot of the things that have been said today, as many as I can. I mean, we just had an officer from the Plumbers Union here, and that reminded me, because I've been editing the Right to Work newsletter for a long time, that it was just a little over a decade ago that the international head of the Plumbers Union and his second in command were forced to resign and pay something like $11 million in restitution for investing $100 million from union pension funds into a hotel in Florida without really any kind of oversight by other officers of the union, much less the rank and file. And he built this hotel, and his name was Martin Mataloni, and he had a coffee house that was a Mataloni coffee house, and Mataloni exercise rooms, and I think there might have been a statue of Martin Mataloni in here. So people called it, he built a monument to himself. And it's true he was ultimately ousted and forced to pay $11 million in restitution, but it appears that he might have paid this money with insurance money from the Plumbers Union. That is, really with the plumber rank and file money that he'd been stealing from, not with his own money. So, the Plumbers Union may do a lot of good things, but I don't think we can really count on the officials of the Plumbers Union to police themselves. I mean, everybody's human, and everybody can be tempted to be corrupt. And that's why we normally have laws that say that private organizations don't have the power to tax people, because that's effectively what compulsory union dues are. And in fact, a lot of people are in favor of them. Like that analogy, they say, well, everybody has to pay taxes, so it should be fair that everybody who's represented by the union should have to pay dues. But I think this is, and I'm going to really spend the vast majority of my time on this particular question. And the justification that's given, we've heard it today, is that you have Section 9A of the National Labor Relations Act and parallel clauses in a number of other federal laws and in many state laws that say that when a union seeks and obtains the power to speak for all workers at a business or in another bargaining unit as defined by the government, then the union has to represent all those people, even including the people who didn't vote for the union and people who never wanted the union at all. So what do we do about that? The argument is that because the union represents everybody under these circumstances, and incidentally, previous witnesses have correctly said that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that unions can seek and obtain recognition to bargain for people on a members-only basis in the Consolidated Edison decision of 1938 and in subsequent decisions. And a lot of people who favor unions have been calling attention to this in recent years, because a fellow by the name of Charles Morris, who's a very pro-union law professor, he thinks that unions should use this more, that they should seek recognition on a members-only basis when they can't get a majority of the workers to vote in a union, and then the union can negotiate a contract with members only, and ultimately they'll get monopoly power that way, because he's all in favor of the union being able to get a monopoly, but he thinks that they should use this tool, but unions have declined to use this tool, whatever the reason. They hardly ever. There are examples that we could point to, but they're very rare. I'm not going to deny they're rare, where the union seeks and obtains recognition to represent members only. But the fact that unions don't take advantage of this ability that they have under the law, and that has been affirmed by the courts over and over again, and a lot of pro-union people acknowledge they have and say, oh, use it more to spread unionism. Well, the fact that they don't take advantage of it doesn't mean that they don't have it. So one response to the so-called free rider argument for forced union dues based on Section 9A of the National Labor Relations Act and other similar clauses is say, let's just get rid of that, and deny unions the power to represent people who don't want to belong. And we're all in favor of that National Right to Work Committee. We do not think that unions should have to represent people who don't want to belong. And in fact, they could seek recognition on a members-only basis, but as long as they do seek recognition this way, well, we'll stop. We'd be glad to stop them from doing it by passing a law. That's going to be a tall order. It's not likely to happen in the near future. So we accept for the sake of argument that Section 9A is going to stay in place for a while. Is it justified then to force workers to pay union dues as a job condition? Well, I say that there's an unstated assumption that practically everybody who's spoken in favor of the status quo in Missouri today has had. And that's that every single worker who's represented by a union, whether he's a member or not, benefits thereby. He benefits as a result of being represented by a union. And when you state it so baldly like that, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Can it really be the case that every single worker who's represented by a union benefits thereby? Well, I see Representative Frame is nodding there, so I guess he agrees. Well, I think the facts will show, and I think I can demonstrate within just a few minutes that is not true. And in fact, it's not just a small number, but a very substantial number. You can't put an exact number on it for sure, because there's really no way that an outsider can know whether an individual on balance benefits or is harmed by being represented by a union. But you can know that it's large numbers of workers who are represented by a union and are economically harmed by being represented by a union. And so if you want to continue to support forced union dues, then what you really ought to say is, well, I know that there are many workers out there who are forced to accept a union as a job condition and are harmed economically as a consequence of that. But for the good of most workers and for the good of society as a whole, we should continue to authorize firing such workers for refusal to pay dues or fees to the union. If you say that, we would have the beginning of a more honest debate on this subject. But until this basic fact is acknowledged, we don't really have an honest debate. And let me address specifically the subject of salary caps, because we just had a couple of witnesses really deny that salary caps exist under federal law. And I don't know exactly what they mean, but I'm going to tell you, maybe in some sense this is true, but it's not true in the sense that I think people would understand it anyway. When a union negotiates a contract, all of the workers covered by the contract are subject to the wage rates of that contract. They may not all be getting paid the same because some have more seniority than others, or some may have differences in their job definitions, but they're all subject to the wage rates of the union contract. The employer may only pay particular employees who are especially productive and he thinks deserve higher pay than the union contract more with the permission of the union. And occasionally the union does get this permission. It's common actually in a couple of fields of endeavor that we all know about. In Hollywood, star actors Tom Hanks does not work for union scale. Okay, so he's a member of the union, he's subject to union representation, but he gets paid a lot more than union scale. But the company can only do that because the union gives permission. And typically the union doesn't give permission, and we know that the unions generally don't want to give permission because in 2012, in the summer of 2012, legislation came up before the U.S. Congress. It was an amendment to the Agriculture Reform, Food, and Jobs Act that would have changed that. And it was an amendment to legislation called the RAISE Act, Rewarding Achievement and Incentivizing Successful Employees Act. And all that would have done is that it would have said that a unionized employer, if he has evidence of some kind that an employee is doing a better job than other union employees who are under the same contract, he can pay that employee more as long as all the other employees are eligible to receive the same pay increase if they prove that they're doing just as well as he is. And that's all the legislation said. It didn't allow employers to pay people more if it was your brother-in-law or anything like that. It only allowed it if there was demonstrable evidence that the worker who would get the pay increase would be doing better for productivity. And what do you know? The top officials of all the unions opposed it. I mean, Jim Hoffa, the head of the Teamsters, was typical. He said this would allow employers to grant wage increases unilaterally to workers of their choosing And that is very bad, That can't be done. It would undermine the ability of the union to create uniform standards for all employees. The AFL-CIO opposed it, the SEIU opposed it, and the legislation went down, the amendment actually went down 54-45, and it was pretty much straight party line vote. So all the politicians who typically get supported by the unions opposed giving unionized employers the ability to pay unionized workers above the union contract. So when we previously heard this is a lie about pay caps, well, the real lie is saying that pay caps don't exist. Maybe it's not a lie, maybe it's just misinformation. But now you know. Pay caps do exist, and as I'm going to demonstrate in a little bit, pay caps are common. I mean, in the public sector, and I know this doesn't relate to right to work per se in Missouri, but it's very common, and it's well known. In schools, in public schools, teacher unions insist on what is called a single salary schedule, and that means that what you get paid depends on how many years you've been teaching and perhaps how much postgraduate education you have. You don't get paid more for teaching a subject that it's very hard to recruit teachers for. So I'm not speaking against English teachers or social studies teachers here, but the fact is that it's much easier to recruit English teachers and social studies teachers at a given salary level than it is to recruit high school physics or chemistry teachers who are qualified for the job. I mean, you can recruit them if you don't care whether they're qualified or not, but to recruit people who are qualified for the job at the same salary level as is necessary to recruit English teachers is basically impossible. And that's why we have perpetual shortages of teachers in certain sectors and not in other sectors because of the single salary schedule, which in all frankness was not started by the unions, but is perpetuated by the unions all over the country, even in non-right-to-work states, because even in right-to-work states, because the unions have a lot of power in pretty much every state. Teacher unions do, and this is what they like. But they like all workers' ability to be able to be paid more, to be based on what the union says and not on what the worker does as an individual. And I'm going to give a little bit of additional evidence here, just in case you're doubting me up to now, coming from the Economic Policy Institute. The Economic Policy Institute is a think tank in Washington, D.C. that was founded basically by 8 union heads. Mostly, I think they were FLCO affiliated unions, maybe unions. Yeah, I don't think they consulted too much with our officials, chiefs, presidents, whatever you. Yeah, they pooled their funds to form this think tank back in the 1980s. And the Washington Post, when it was first formed, called it organized laborers think. They call it laborers think tank. I'm adding organized labor. When they say labor, they mean organized labor. So anyway, so I'm quoting the Economic Policy Institute. You don't think this is going to be an organization with an anti-union bias. And I'm quoting a survey of union-friendly academic literature on the impact of exclusive union bargaining on the pay of employees with the divergent levels of skill and industriousness. And this is a survey by Richard Rothstein, he wrote it a number of years ago, but he was and is a fellow with the Economic Policy Institute. And he wrote, in unionized firms, I'm adding that in brackets, but that's what he's talking about, unionized, the rest of it is direct from him. Wages of lower paid workers are raised above the market rate with the increased offset, and then I'm adding in part, and there are ellipses, it's a little more, but the rest of it is his words, the rest offset by reducing pay of the most productive workers. If firms with this practice are rare, competitors will be able to bid away their best workers. So this is a total advocate of monopolistic unionism who acknowledges the typical impact of a union contract is reducing pay of the best workers, reducing pay of the most productive workers, and not just reducing it, below what, it might be in a perfect world, but reducing it below what non-union competitors are willing to pay those workers, because he's worried about the best workers getting lured away by higher pay from non-union firms that are not subject to the same restrictions. We have further confirmation of this
from the late Clyde Summers. I know the name may not ring bells here, but in the labor law field, this is one of the chiefs, you know. I mean, he's also an advocate. He died a couple of years ago, of monopolistic unionism. He's not against, he's not for right to work. He wasn't for right to work. He was well known as a reformer of unions, and he was instrumental in helping pass the Landon-Griffin Act in 1959, one of the most important pieces of union reform legislation ever passed. And in 1995, review article for the Comparative Labor Law Journal, the book, it was a review book by fellow workplace policy specialist Sheldon Leader. He quoted Leader with approval to explain the so-called free rider excuse for forced unionism is deficient, first of all, because under monopoly bargaining, he didn't use that word, but workers who don't want a union are, in his words and Leader's words, often actually made worse off, end quote, than they were before. And then Summers elaborated in his own words. Full-timers may bargain to limit the jobs of part-timers. Seniority provisions may disadvantage younger workers. We've been hearing about that today. And wage increases of the low-skilled may be at the expense of the highly skilled. And then, determining whether the long-term benefits to a particular employee are greater than the burdens and risks of union membership is practically impossible. So, it is the height of arrogance for politicians in Washington, D.C. or Jefferson City to tell a worker who doesn't think that he is benefited by a union that despite what his opinion is, he really is, and therefore he should be forced to pay dues or fees to that union as a condition of employment. I think that's all I'll say about that, but I will address, because Representative Burleson asked me to very briefly, the question of wages, because compensation, this is brought up a lot. Before we can determine or even talk about whether right-to-work laws cause wages and benefits to go down, first we should know whether there's even a correlation between right-to-work laws and a slower growth in or decline in wages and salaries, and wages and benefits. If there's no correlation between right-to-work status and slower growth in wages, salaries, benefits, and bonuses, then right-to-work laws, by definition, cannot cause slower growth in wages, salaries, benefits, and bonuses. And in fact, the data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, adjusted for inflation, that's all I've done, show that private sector employee compensation in the Midwestern right-to-work states, these are the states that are more comparable to Missouri than just compared to the whole nation, rose by 15.2% in real terms, so adjusted for inflation, from 2002 to 2012, whereas the total private sector compensation for employees, private sector in Missouri, rose by just 1.5%. So part of that reflects the fact that employment growth is greater, because this is total wages, salaries, benefits, and bonuses. And part of it is because employment growth is greater. But even when you account for that, still on a per employee basis, growth was still greater in the Midwestern right-to-work states than in Missouri. So why do we imagine that enactment, if there's no track record of this whatsoever, that enactment of a right-to-work law in Missouri would cause wages and salaries and benefits to go more slowly than they otherwise would, or even to go down, which I guess we're hearing. Why would we imagine that? There's no reason for that speculation, and therefore there's no reason why we should have to, answer that hypothetical question. All right, I'm glad to take any questions you have. This one.
Thank you, sir. Ken? Yes, go ahead.
Permission to inquire briefly.
Go ahead.
You said a lot of things, but I wanted you to.
All true.
I wanted you to elaborate on the fact that I know you spoke about union corruption, when you first started.
Yeah.
Because the
pipetter's head was here, or mine.
Right. I wanted you to elaborate on corporate corruption in reference to employees who work there, and their pensions being obliterated, by corporations. And also, you talked about, unions normally they have to have at least 50 plus 1 in order for that company to even become a union. So we live in democracy. I want you to talk about the government, you know,
Let me
in
talk about
relation.
the
Wait a minute, hold on. I want you to talk about.
How many are going to get? Why don't you give them one at a time, and then you can ask me follow-up, okay? So
Okay.
I can remember a little bit more.
Okay.
All right. With regard, I'm glad you brought up the majority rule question. Unions are not. The unionization is not run by majority rule, and it shouldn't be run by majority rule. You know, as far as the individual choice of employees. So in the U.S. today, and this has been the case for 80 years, if the employer doesn't want a union and the majority of employees don't want a union, but one or more of the employees do want a union, the minority, whether it's one or a substantial minority, have the right to join a union. And they have the right to pay dues to a union. Their right to be affiliated with the union, despite the fact that their employer doesn't want one and the majority of the employees don't want one, the majority of the employees cannot vote to deny a worker who doesn't want a union, who wants a union, the right to join.
Well, that's kind of inaccurate because I've been out there, you know, organizing companies, and when you're organizing companies, you know, they have to have
That's joining, not be represented by you. They're two different things.
Okay, so you're saying that, I mean, I can be over here, the company I work for doesn't have a union, I can go over here and join a union.
No, I mean that you can join, even though your company isn't organized, you are totally free under the law to join and pay dues to any union you want to, including the union that is seeking to organize your business.
But they can't negotiate for you, though.
No, because I didn't say to be represented by a union. I said
well, you're misleading them.
No, I'm not. I said to join a union. I think when I realized that as a unionist, you may have gotten unused to common English. But in common English, joining a union means joining and paying dues to the union. Not having the union as your exclusive
Well,
argument.
that's misleading because you didn't define it.
I think that's enough. Let's hear from Ken Mangus, please.
I think join.
You didn't define it.
Amen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for letting me be here today. I am Ken Menges. I am a registered lobbyist for the Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Union, representing almost 8,000 sheet metal railroad workers in the state of Missouri. I'd like to start with a quote that kind of puts this all in perspective. One sentence probably would sum it up. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of people under the pretense of taking care of them." That sums up right to work, where it's at. On the previous witness, we talked about the 15% right to work states bringing their wages up. What's the political spin on that? I'm glad they're trying to catch up to Missouri. We're ahead of them. They're ready to catch up with us. I'm glad they're taking after us. Raise all the wages. Missouri employers and workers do not need politicians meddling in their issues. They know and we know how to do our business. We need politicians, your help, in growing an economy that can grow their businesses so that they can provide for increased growth, more jobs, a better future, education for their kids, and a secure retirement. Democracy is the base of all union organizing. It takes a democracy, the majority of the workers to organize a union. It takes an agreement between the employer and the employees that is agreed to by a majority of the workers. This is democracy at work. We've heard a lot today about the effects that HB 1099 will have on the economy of Missouri working families. What about safety? Safety is number one. We want to see people go home from work every day safe and sound. States that have enacted laws similar to HB 1099 have, on the low side, depending on which statistics you look at, 36% of fatality workplace in the workplace, as high as 52%. Working together is the answer. In Missouri, the Sheet Metal Air and Rail Transportation Union spends $3.5 billion a year in their training facilities, training future and current craftsmen to do their jobs safely on day one facilities are funded between the employer and the union. This is union money training our workforce. On the railroad, we are constantly being trained in how to do our job more safely. We live and work in one of the most dangerous industries in the United States, but our ability to freely being able to report safety issues without reprisals creates a safe workplace. This safety creates professionalism. Professionalism translates into safety for the worker, the employer, and the public. Like the engineer who stopped the Amtrak train last week and saved a fatality of this dangerous situation. Or like the sheet metal worker who was called into your home to repair your heating system last week during the cold. The worker who's building the new hospital here in Jeff City, who's making sure that no corners are cut to ensure that your family is in the safest building. This does not happen by accident. Unions create the avenue to have a safer workplace. House Bill 1099, as similar laws have done in other states, will cost lives. The lives of Missourians are at risk. I ask, are you willing to take that risk?
Thank you, sir. Mike Kelly?
Inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
You say that you would like to see government just stay out of the business in general, is that correct? Correct. So would that be the same to also say that since the federal government put in the standards that require things such as prevailing wage and the governing regulations for unions currently, that you would support telling the federal government that they should remove all those regulations as well?
No, I can't.
I just wanted to make sure that we did have two different standards here. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. James Harris, representing the Adam Smith Foundation, 501c4. I'm a registered lobbyist to go on the record in support of House Bill 1099. And I won't bore the committee with too much, but I would kind of begin the whole discussion of freedom of work hopefully does not become a conversation where people think we want people to make less money, we want people or attacking workers. I would submit that's like saying you want kids to have dirty air, drink dirty water. We want, hopefully I do, and I believe most proponents want more Missourians to be paid, more Missourians to have access to good quality jobs where they can provide for their family, they can have a good quality life. And so when you look at the fact that the median income in the state of Missouri has dropped $1,500 the last 4 years, we've added 181,000 people to food stamps. I hail from Washington, Missouri, as my home. I remember lots of parents that got up early and drove to McDonald Douglas. Those were the good jobs, or to Ford, or to Chrysler. Those jobs aren't there anymore. And if you drive around Missouri, 2004, remember the Briggs and Stratton plant closed in Poplar Bluff. Those were good jobs in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. When that plant closed, there were a lot of people that were laid off. They had to start doing jobs for cash. They had to start cutting grass, whatever they could. There wasn't a backfill of factories coming in. And we, for a state to succeed, you have to build things, you have to manufacture things. And as Americans, we make the best things in the world. And I might sound a little snobby when I say it, but if you go around the world, you'll find the American product typically is the best. And so you have to have a conversation, well, what's going on? Why are these jobs not in Missouri? Why are these factories not coming here? So a couple of just facts of throw out. Some say right to work's anti-union. I believe freedom of work is about giving the worker the freedom to choose whether or not they want to join something. Just like a realtor might join the Realtor Association, a dentist might join the Dental Association. Some might say, well, if I don't join the Realtor Association, Sam Licklight is lobbying, and the person that didn't pay, should they benefit? I mean, there's sometimes people join it. They join for the educational factors, other factors out there. But in Oklahoma, and I like looking at facts, between 2011 and 2012, Oklahoma, which is a right-to-work state, added 21,000 union jobs. Missouri lost 51,000 union jobs in that same period. Right-to-work, if you look at between January 2009 to January of 2013, Missouri lost, according to BLS data, nearly 24,000 jobs. Tennessee gained 111,000 jobs. Oklahoma, smaller state, gained 62,000 jobs. Nebraska, I mean the Cornhusker state, it's not, added more than 40,000 jobs. I would have liked Missouri to add those jobs because those are many of our friends, our neighbors, our family members. I have family members that one who worked at a labor union, and when the Ford plant closed, he and his family had to move. When we don't have jobs in this state, it tears families apart. They have to move to go find work. I have a lot of friends. Our babysitter graduated. Good girl. She went to Texas to get a job. And I said, well, why Texas? What would you leave for? I'm sure your mom and dad aren't too happy. She said, well, that's where I got a job offer. And so we have to have this conversation. Some say, well, wages go down. Well, who wants people making less money? If you look in Missouri, the average weekly wage as of July 2013 was $745, with the high being in St. Louis at $885,000. Now, some say, well, right to work goes down. Well, it depends. It's all relative. In New York, the average weekly salary is $938. In California, it's $931. However, both of those two states have the highest cost of living. If you look at housing costs, transportation costs, utility costs, food costs. And so when you look at their net after they pay those bills, they have less money. If you look at right-to-work states, 9 of the 10 states with the lowest cost of living, okay, houses a little cheaper, you can get a little more square footage, utility rates cost less, are right-to-work. And if you look in those states, after they pay those expenses, those workers have more money in their pockets. It's kind of like when I moved back from Washington, D.C. nearly 10 years ago. I paid $1,300 rent in Washington, D.C., thought I was getting ripped off. When I came here, I was paying $400, and I'm like, man, this is a steal. I had more money net in my pocket. Missouri's kind of in the middle. We're 17th lowest in the nation when you look at our cost of living index. So another way to say that is in your right-to-work state, the adjusted per capita income was $38,590 versus in a right-to-work state versus $36,296 in a forced union state. I mean, let's look at real dollars. So when we make and try to avoid the ad hominem attacks here and try to go, will this help create jobs? Another thing, someone said, well, wages. Right-to-work states have grown faster in their between 2002 2012, so about 10 years. Compensation grew 19.4% in right-to-work states, where it only grew 6.1% in union states. Another way, if you don't have jobs, what are people going to do? End up in social welfare. Right-to-work states have a much lower portion of the population on using TANF. On average, 6.3 per every 1,000 people in a right-to-work state use TANF. Okay, 6.3. In a forced union state, or a state where you don't have right-to-work, it's 17.4. So, are these correlations? I don't know, but there's enough things where at least we need to have a conversation. Again, if you look at job growth between 2002 and 2012, the right-to-work states' job growth was at 6.4%, only 0.4% in states that were not right-to-work. You want to look at, you can go into GDP and other factors, but when you look at all this data, it at least sparks, well, why is this? A couple years ago, we brought in a site selection company, testified before a Senate company. So businesses go hire firms like this to kind of go, where should we move? They said, they give them a form to fill out. You tell us what's important to you, business, company, factory. 75% of their clients said that being right to work was pass-fail. So if Missouri application gets thrown in the trash, and they said it was not wages, it wasn't unions necessarily, it might be cross-training employees, it might be other factors that came in. And as you go around the state, Cape Girardeau, Poplar Bluff, Sykeston, West Plains, St. Louis, Washington, Missouri, here in town, your business people don't attack workers. They want good workers. Good workers help them make money. We're a capitalistic society. It is cross-training, it's rules, it's in the work occupational title, we have 240 something different titles. If I'm a non-union contractor trying to build a house, how the heck would I even try to report all these different wages if my guy sweeps and then he does plug something and then he's doing going between maybe an electrician to a laborer to a carpenter. So none of this is about anti-worker. It's about, do these regulations and all these rules are they outdated? And are they putting too much of a burden where businesses go, I can go somewhere else and I don't have to deal with it. It's less risk, et cetera, to build my plant, build my factory. And if you go around the state, it is getting bad. You have lots of towns where you have fewer good jobs, factories are closing. Maybe St. Louis is doing great, get in the car, drive around the state of Missouri. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Andy. Denise Hasty.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Hasty. I'm the Vice President of Governmental Affairs and Public Relations for Associated General Contractors of St. Louis. I'm also a registered lobby on behalf of that association. The AGC represents 400 corporate members who are commercial, industrial, heavy and highway contractors, industry partners, and related firms in 23 counties on the eastern side of the state. The AGC of St. Louis is opposed to House Bill 1099. We are a membership organization that's comprised of both union and open shop contractors. And under current law, those companies individually elect to either be open shop or enter into collective bargaining agreements with organized labor. This is a basic free market decision made by the contracting firm when they opened their business. We've heard a lot today about negative impacts of right to work on the construction industry, but I don't know that we've discussed this aspect of it today. There are many of the AGC's union contractors would be harmed and some completely dissolved if right to work became a reality because of a federal law, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, known more commonly as ERISA. As amended in the 1980s and 90s, the law places the responsibility for underfunded and unfunded pension funds on each employer, the contractor in our members' cases. This is a complicated issue, as is the explanation of how these funds became, the ones that are underfunded, became in that state. Both the underfundedness and both relate to changes in the ERISA law. The AGC has developed a white paper to better explain the complexities of the ERISA law on the union contractors during the transition to right to work. And I have a copy that I'll leave behind for every one of the committee members. Ultimately, though, many well-established and profitable construction firms based here in Missouri would cease to exist. Consequently, there would be a significant loss of industry knowledge and experience within those firms, as well as an increase in unemployment of workers, and then the reduction of taxes paid to the state from both the corporations and their employees. The proponents of right to work will claim and have claimed that we might increase economic development. And the AGC submits to you that we would definitely see an increase in loss of businesses and loss of employment to the construction industry, plus a loss to the whole state as a whole. Again, I have our white paper here for everyone that is a very generic kind of explanation of the ERISA law and the complications of the multi-employer pension funds. I appreciate all of your time today. You've heard everyone through their entirety, and I appreciate that diligence on your part.
Thank you, ma'am. Fred.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Fred Riley today representing the Builders Association in Kansas City. We also have offices in Springfield, Columbia, and Jefferson City. We're here in opposition to House Bill 1099 and just wanted to go on the record. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Is Brian Johnson. How about Earl Williams? Are there any here who wish to testify strictly for information purposes? Seeing no further witnesses, that will conclude our hearing on. I'm sorry, sir.
Gingrich, representing myself. I'm speaking for Bill 1099. My issue is personal liberty, freedom of association, and freedom of non-association. I was a member of SEIU. The union, well, most unions spend much more time, and SEIU particularly had no part of my training. It was all company based to train me for school bus driving. They spent most of their activity time as an extension of the Democratic Party, which I do not support. I don't know how the Democratic Party continues to make middle-class people think that it's working for their benefit when the differences between the low income and high income during this Democratic administration have gotten much more extreme, and the unemployment of minorities has become much worse than everyone else. So I don't know how these groups continue to be supported, continue to believe they are being benefited by that party, but that is their right to believe. But I think the unions need to operate in the arena of actual benefits and be able to sell the members, the prospective members, on the idea of joining them rather than it being a responsibility in order to get hired. I was given union membership papers when I signed up for the work, and I was supporting basically an arm of the Democratic Party, and although I had to discontinue my employment due to health issues early last spring, I am still getting political drivel from them to support candidates and proposals that would make the government larger, that would collect more taxes out of the economy, to go through the federal siphon to pay the people who live in one of the best paid metropolitan areas in the country. That would be Washington, D.C., if my illusion isn't clear. And I just, as a worker, I feel as though I'm enslaved to support ideas and leadership that is not expressing my view. I don't think they should belong in politics. And I think if they were having to compete in the arena of ideas, they would have to be democratic in the way they represent their people and not cozy up to one side that seems to give benefits. When I was studying public administration at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, I learned about the golden rule of oligarchy. And that is that when someone is chosen to head up or represent a group, that person is no longer a member of that group. That person is the member of, in your case, legislative representatives, and that is your peer group now. Union bosses are now in the peer group of union bosses. They are not peers to the members of their unions, and they may or may not be doing things incidentally to benefit those they represent, but they are certainly doing things to benefit their own peer group. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, sir. Do we have someone else who wishes to testify?
I apologize. When I got here, there was no sign-up sheet.
We'll remind everyone to please fill out a form.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to speak here today. My name is Mike Jerome. I am the president of Bi-State Utilities Company, which we are a underground utilities contractor in St. Louis. I'm also speaking on behalf of the Site Improvement Association, which is about 100, has about 100 contractor members that we represent in the city of St. Louis, city and county, surrounding counties. How's that? Just to make something clear, I'm on the board of examiners in the city of St. Louis for plumbing and drain laying, and you do not have to be a union member to be a licensed plumber. There's a lot of them. Okay, just wanted to clear that up. I've been kind of listening today. I had a lot of things to say, and they've mostly been said, so I won't dwell there. But from what I'm gathering here, at the start of this meeting, it was not about wages. It was about having the right to sign up to a union or not. I don't know why, if you don't want to be in a union, I don't know who's making you join a union in the first place. You can work, there's only 7% of the people in the state are unions, in the union, so there's 93% that are not, that have chosen not to be. So I don't get that part. But if I'm an out-of-town business and wanting to come to St. Louis, and you tell me you really should come here because people in this state don't have to join the union, I don't get that. I don't see where that is going to get me to come in here. Obviously, if you tell me now, oh, you can only pay you're going to pay your guys half of what they pay in the state of Illinois, well, now you've got my ears perked up. And I don't think cutting wages is a good idea. I mean, we've got a great middle class here, and we certainly don't need to go to the bottom. If we want to look like 1980s China or Singapore, we can get, we just won't pay anybody. But it just doesn't make any sense. That's all I have. If anybody wants to ask me any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be incredibly quick. My name is Nancy Giddens, and I'm representing the Construction Employers Coalition. It's a group of subcontractors based out of St. Louis. I don't have anything earth-shattering to add that you haven't already heard today, other than to say it's a coalition consisted of both open and closed shops, yet they unanimously oppose right-to-work legislation.
Thank you very much. Are there others here to testify for information? Not appearing. That will conclude the hearing on House Bill 1099. Thank you very much.
Adjourn.